So the other day, a few weeks ago, I had an urge, and it wasn't a gross urge, but it was an urge to relive some of my childhood. And so that included horrors like watching The Secret of Nim, and experiencing bereavement when all of my friends decided to abandon me in elementary school because they thought I was abandoning them by going to a different school. But all of that paled in comparison to the depression-inducing series that was A Series of Unfortunate Events. Now, A Series of Unfortunate Events is a 13-book children's gothic fiction series by author Daniel Handler, who wrote under the pen name Lemony Snicket. And while these books were marketed towards children, a lot of the content I don't think was very kid-friendly. I mean, in the second book, Count Olaf just straight up murders a guy. Oh, no. I guess to be courteous to you guys, I might as well not include spoilers, so I'm gonna try my best not to do that. And in order to keep this video down to a reasonable length, it's going to be in 2 parts. This one is going to be covering books 1 through 7. So here we go. We start book number 1 off with a description of our protagonists. Violet, the oldest, is an inventor. Klaus, the middle child, is a reader. And Sunny, the youngest, is a biter. Kinky. So after finding out about the loss of someone that they love, they're taken into custody by their beloved Count Olaf, who's either their 3rd cousin 4 times removed, or their 4th cousin 3 times removed. We really don't know. That doesn't matter, because he makes them do a bunch of awful chores, and he's kind of an all-around ass to them. And so after the children find out about a plot about Count Olaf wanting to marry Violet in order to get their money, they do what they can in order to make sure that this does not happen. Because a 40-year-old man marrying a 14-year-old girl is wrong. And so from a setup standpoint, this book is actually very good at giving us what we're going to be experiencing the whole rest of the series. That being namely the children running away from Count Olaf's various schemes. But none of the characters really have any depth in this book. Count Olaf is basically just your stereotypical, ooh, I want money villain. And the kids are pretty much devoted to the Mary Sue and Gary Stu type character traits. Although it is kind of funny how cartoonishly evil Count Olaf and his henchpeople are. I mean, it is kind of ridiculous that Count Olaf would have the children do 101 chores throughout the day. And then throw a fit that their dinner is not roast beef, but is in fact pasta puttanesca. I mean, who would even think up something like that? So book number 2 is The Reptile Room, and this one is batshit insane. So the Baudelaire orphans go to live with their Uncle Montgomery, who is a herpetologist, a person who studies snakes. And so it turns out that Uncle Monty is actually this pretty chill guy. I mean, as soon as they get there, he tells them that they're going to be going to Peru for a snake expedition, and he buys them all new clothes and all new stuff just so that way they would stay comfortable. Things don't stay happy for long because soon Count Olaf shows up as an Italian man named Stefano. Now, this book, for me at least, was probably the most suspenseful book up until book number 10. And that's because Count Olaf actually almost wins. I know in the last book he almost won, but this one had more of a sense of urgency to it. Like, at the end of the book, all he needed to do was put the kids into a car and drive away, and he would have won the whole shebang. That is, of course, if he, Mr. Poe, and a doctor hadn't had a long drawn-out conversation about who should ride with who, which is actually kind of hilarious if you think about it. It's just kind of amazing how Daniel Handler could have written a conversation that drawn out and that convoluted. And again, there's really no growth for any of the characters, except maybe for Violet. She does end up breaking into Stefano's suitcase in order to find some evidence that will help them out. But other than that, the kids are just more delegated to their character traits from the previous book. Number 3 is The Wide Window. Now for me, the next 2 books were probably the most boring out of the whole series. And that's boring by A Series of Unfortunate Events standards, that's not boring by like normal book standards. So the kids go and stay with their Aunt Josephine, who is a widow due to the unfortunate death of her husband Ike at the fin of some lachrymose leeches. Now, all we really need to know going forward in this book is that Aunt Josephine's husband's name was Ike. And because I'm not doing spoilers, I'm not saying he comes up later, but read into that what you will. And so the Baudelaires, they actually end up stealing a boat in order to save themselves from certain doom. And that's all you need to know about book number 3. Moving on. Book number 4 is The Miserable Mill. Now this one, like I said earlier, is kind of boring, but it also adds in another interesting dimension to the series, being that one of the kids is actually involved in the scheme with Count Olaf, and that being Klaus because he was hypnotized. So it's not like they were doing it willingly, but the fact still stands. So the only memorable thing about this book is that their caretaker this time around boss shows up later. And he's eternally surrounded by smoke covering his face. Oh, and I guess the Baudelaires kill someone. Not gonna say who, but it happens. And it's kind of gruesome. Okay, so this is where the series kind of gets a little more interesting. Book number 5, The Austere Academy. Now, this is kind of at a point in the series where Daniel Handler starts critiquing pieces of society, this one being the education system, and it is so insane what the teachers teach Violet and Klaus. Violet is asked by her teacher to memorize a bunch of stories that he just tells while eating bananas, and Klaus is delegated to remembering a bunch of measurements of random objects that they measure in class. Now, where's Sunny, you might be wondering? She's a secretary. A secretary who has to make her own goddamn staples. But who is she secretary to? Well, her boss is probably the most memorable villain outside of Count Olaf the whole series has ever seen. He comes in the form of Vice Principal Nero. And this guy, he has 4 pigtails in his hair. He's rather fat, he has a rather wonky tie, and he carries a violin everywhere he goddamn goes. He also likes to mimic what people say, so if you say something like, "That's not what I said," he'll mimic back with, "That's not what I said," which is annoying, but it's actually more hilarious than it sounds. And I have to say that the Austere Academy is probably the pinnacle of hilarity of the whole book series. And not only because it's so relatable, it's so cartoonishly ridiculous. And its critiques on how the American school system is just so insane are funny. For instance, there is a moment where Nero is telling the kids that if they enter his office or the floor that his office is on during a specific time of day, or ever, really, they do not get silverware to eat with. And because Sunny is his assistant, that means she's going to be in there all the time, which means she can never have silverware to eat her food. And that is a rigged system at its finest. Now, this book also introduces a few other major subplots that happen throughout the rest of the series, that being Isidore and Duncan Quagmire. They are the only shining ray of hope in the Baudelaires' lives at the Academy. Now, it seems that Isidore and Duncan can actually get more done than the Baudelaires can by themselves. That being that they discovered an organization called VFD, which is also another, reigning subplot throughout the rest of the series. And in the end of the book, something rather unfortunate happens that results in the Baudelaires going to have to look for some people that they just became friends with. And I'll leave it at that. Okay, so book number 6, The Ersatz Elevator. For someone out there who's smarter than me, is Ersatz a German word? Yeah, whatever, I'll Google it later. So the Ersatz Elevator introduces us to characters Esme and Jerome Squalor. And the social element that the Ersatz Elevator critiques is, I want to say vanity. Either that or just, fashion in general. So Esme and Jerome Squalor are the kids' new caretakers. Jerome is completely submissive to his wife, while Esme just kind of does whatever the hell she wants. And oh, the Baudelaires are still looking for those Quagmire triplets. I didn't say that they were triplets, did I? The Quagmires are triplets! No spoilers. So Esme and Jerome live on 667 Dark Avenue, because Esme is the devil. Almost the devil. And so really the only major thing that happens in this book is the Baudelaires find something that leads to their house from where Esme and Jerome live, and that Esme leaves someone she loves to go with someone else that she loves. I really hope my vagueness is enticing you to read this series, because it is just killing me not to say anything. And so the final book I'm going to be talking about in this video, The Vile Village. And I'm pretty certain this book is about cults. However subtle, because there's this village called the Village of Foul Devotees, and they basically worship crows. And they have a bunch of rules, and they all wear a certain thing, but that's beside the point. Still think this is for children? So when the kids go to live in the Village of Foul Devotees, they find out that Count Olaf has been found and captured. Except then they find out it's not really Count Olaf, so it is the ultimate plot cul-de-sac. However, the kids do manage to meet a man named Hector who takes them in. And Hector's actually doing some pretty illegal stuff with some contraband. And this is important because it sort of comes up later. And so throughout their stay in the village, the Baudelaires actually are finding some notes that are in the form of couplets. They have no idea where they're coming from, but they do know that they're written by Isadora Quagmire, who just happens to be a poet. So when they find all the couplets, they actually form an acronym that tells the Baudelaires where they can find the Quagmires. There's also this running gag of the newspaper, the Daily Punctilio, getting the names of the Baudelaires and Count Olaf wrong. And so for the rest of this series, the Baudelaires and Count Olaf are known as Count Omar, and the Baudelaires are known as Veronica, Clyde, and Susie. I think that just goes to show how highly Daniel Handler thinks of newspapers, and that's not very highly. This book actually wraps up a subplot that was started in book 5, that being the Quagmires being found. And then they end up flying away with someone. And then afterwards, the Baudelaires are on the run from the authorities. The character progression of the Baudelaires in the first 7 books goes from them being perfect one-dimensional children to them actually committing crimes. Even though the crimes they commit are actually for good reasons. I don't know if good reasons and crime should ever come into the same sentence, but that's their rationale. And so while the first 7 books of this series are actually highly derivative, it's interesting to see how Count Olaf is going to dress up and how the kids are going to foil his scheme. Also, I felt that the language that Daniel Handler used in at least the first 3 books was a little pretentious. And so there you have it. There's my view on the first 7 books of a series of unfortunate events. I'm sure the next video will be better when we talk about books 8 through 13, which is where the series goes from fairly predictable to, what the heck did I just read? This is Dustin signing off, but only for now.